Good afternoon, everybody. Today is January 22nd, 2024. Man, time flies. And I'm making this video up as a follow-up video to my last video that I uploaded to YouTube on my channel. And I had mentioned that I was going to try to make the following videos a little more interesting, not just something hung on the canopy and flying around the pattern a few times. So this is my effort to do that. I follow several YouTube people, pilots, YouTube channels, and we know a lot about their flying and a lot about how they fly and their thoughts on all those kinds of things. But we don't know a lot about them. So this is my effort to kind of bridge that gap between who I am and how I got here. My name is Paul Gray. I grew up in Marion, Indiana. Freezing cold up there in the wintertime. Didn't like that. That's where I graduated high school. And after high school, my ticket out of town was to join the Navy. And that's what I did. I traveled the world on the government's dime for 8 years, learned a lot, experienced a lot of different things. Just the most, hands down, carefree and wonderful time of my life. That's, of course, besides kids being born and things like that. But just as a single man, it just couldn't have got any better. Some of the highlights of my 8 years active duty, what I did was I was a machinist in the Navy, worked in machine shops, running lathes and milling machines and so forth, learned a lot. And that's kind of my natural state of mind. I'm a numbers and an engineering kind of guy. Interesting, later, after the Navy, I went to college to become a nurse. Anyway, back to the Navy. Some of my highlights was things that a young man from the flat farmlands of Indiana never forgets is Miss America picked me out of a crowd of guys one time and asked me to dance with her. That was unforgettable. She even kissed me right here on this cheek. I'll never forget that. Dorothy Benham, if you tune into my videos, thank you. And another time, Linda Ronstadt sat on my lap and sang Blue Bayou to me in a big arena of people. That was wonderful. Another unforgettable experience. Another thing that I got to witness from the time it was just a dot on the horizon until it was over was the rescue of a lady at sea. I was stationed on board the USS Canopus, which was a nuclear submarine tender out of Charleston, South Carolina. And we were out to sea. We're about 200 miles out in the Atlantic, and we come across, long story short, a lady in a life raft by herself. She had been out there about a week, and the little yacht that she and her boyfriend were sailing down the East Coast on, got in a storm, capsized, and sank. And she ended up managing to get on the life raft, and she never saw him again, so unfortunately. But anyway, she had been out there a week when we picked her up, and that was pretty interesting. When we got back to port, the commanding officer of the ship, and I don't recall his name, but he and this lady, her name was Derica Dodson. She was from somewhere in the New England, in Europe, I believe. But they were on Good Morning America. Pretty neat stuff. And it was after I got out of the Navy, I went to college on the GI Bill to become a nurse, which I did for 32 years. About 80% of my career was in the intensive care unit. And I have to say that being a nurse is a very interesting perch in life. You see people and families at their worst. You see some at their best, and it's just it was a rewarding career. I did that for 32 years, and I retired about 3 years ago, right after COVID. Like I said, it was just a great experience, and worked with a lot of great physicians and learned so much. Well, that brings me to this. What about flying? When I was 7 years old, I have a cousin who's now a retired airline pilot for Alaskan Airlines, who flies the B-17 bombers. And incidentally, that's where I got this jacket. I took a ride on the B-17 and bought a jacket. Anyway, he took me for a ride when I was about 7 years old. And I knew right then flying was going to be a part of my life someday. There's only been two things that once I experienced it, I knew it was going to be a part of my life forever. One was the plane ride, and the other was the first time I ever kissed a pretty girl. And I thought, yep, there's something to this. Anyway, I managed to get my license while I was in the Navy in the late 70s, and all my time was limited to 152s or 172s back then. I flew for a little while, and then, you know, life gets in the way. You get married, you have kids, you got to buy houses and cars and so forth, and so flying ceased for 20 years. And that then about 20 years ago, I managed, you know, get some of that stuff behind me. I bought a 152 and owned it for 10 years. Managed to put, gosh, I don't know how many, 600-700 hours on that thing, and that was a lot of fun. I flew it to Norfolk, Virginia once to visit my son, who was in the Navy at the time. And incidentally, I flew that thing all the way there and all the way back. And the only thing I had was a little handheld GPS with a screen about that big, about as big as a box of matches. And it had no database in it. I had to put in waypoints, and it was, now with the technology we have these days, that seems almost foolhardy. But I made it all the way to Norfolk, Virginia and back. In about 2007, I got this idea to build an airplane. So Van's Aircraft became the one that I built. I bought an RV-7A, and it was a quick build kit. It took me about 5 years or 1,300 hours, 1,350, I think it was 1,350 hours to build it over the course of 5 years. During that 5 years, there was almost a year that I didn't touch it. So really 4 years, but like I said, 1,350 hours. And it had its first flight on April Fool's Day of 2012. Now that has been, and at that time also, when I got that thing flying, I sold the 152 to a flight school in Georgia. And but building the RV and flying this RV has been the most rewarding thing I've ever done. Learned so much when I was building it. And I've met so many wonderful people along this journey. And I've had it to Petit Jean, Arkansas, a big RV fly-in up there that's held every year. I've had it to Texas to visit, that was just last October, to visit a guy that I grew up across the street with, hadn't seen him in 48 years. I've had it to down to Sun and Fun in Central Florida. I have flown it to my hometown. That was on my bucket list, to take it to my hometown and get a picture at the same FBO where I had my first plane ride. And I'll put a picture of that up here as well, where I had my first plane ride back when I was 7 years old. And I'm not 7 years old anymore. I'll leave that at that. Also took it up to Massachusetts to visit my youngest son, who lives up there, and that was a wonderful trip. And the neat thing about that trip, as far as the aviation stuff, is flying back, I flew through the Hudson River corridor through New York City, where Sully put the jet down in the water. And that was on my bucket list. And now that I've done it, it's still on my bucket list. I want to do it again. It was just amazing, an amazing experience. And that kind of brings me up to where I am today. It's a pretty chilly day outside, so it was a good day to sit inside and make a video and just kind of introduce myself so that anybody that watches this video knows a lot more about me. So there's more videos coming, and hope this maybe bridges a little bit of a gap. So see you next time.